So everybody, just had an incredible interview with my good friend, Dr. Drew. Definitely check this out. We covered so many different topics, you won't believe it. We talked about Trump derangement syndrome, homelessness in California, his political aspirations, and some of my personal stories with Dr. Drew, both of our wives, and some of the very interesting projects that he's going to be taking on moving forward. So just make sure you do subscribe on the Himalaya app to Punching Back with George Papadopoulos, or anywhere you listen or watch your podcast. You're not going to want to miss this interview with Dr. Drew. We have a lot of important details in this interview, a lot of funny details. It's definitely a laugh, and it's a very serious interview at the same time. Hope to hear your feedback on it, and stay tuned for more. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Punching Back with George Papadopoulos, episode 9 here, and I have a real treat for everybody. I have the distinguished honor and pleasure to have my good friend, Dr. Drew, as my first in-house guest at our studio here.
I feel the weight of the moment. But it's a privilege, I'll tell you.
Thank you so much for coming out here. I don't think anybody represents the blurring of Hollywood and politics today more so than even you.
Wow.
I know,
man. You're going to put me in a interesting position here before we even start talking.
And the reason I don't say it lightly is because while, of course, my wife and I, Simona, who we all have hung out, we've all had a great time. She's in Hollywood. She's actually an actress. She's going to be in a couple really big movies. We've had a couple interesting profiles.
Wait, I thought she was a Russian spy. I'm confused.
Well, maybe that's why we're
would she
here.
be cast as a Russian spy in a movie? Because I would cast her. So she wins that role.
Hey, you know what? Espionage is the sexiest topic in the world today. I mean, remember Red Sparrow? That was a pretty good movie.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody could possibly play a real Red Sparrow more than Simona.
I have said, did I not say that the first time I met her? I said, this is a symbol. She is the symbol of what's sick in our press. They get a narrative in their head, and if the narratives, they like it, if it fits their sensibilities, they cannot get it out of their claw. You know, it gets stuck in their craw, and they can't let go. So she is forever going to be from Moscow and be a spy. And what the reality of her life begs no alternative.
Alternative.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter that she was born and raised in Italy.
Law student. Worked for the EU. That's all a cover, dude.
It's all a cover, because you know why it's a cover? Because her spy husband, George Papadopoulos,
I forgot about you. I'm just casting her.
Was connecting Trump to Putin, because I was best friends with Putin for 2 years.
Right,
remember how good of a friend I was?
Oh, I remember that. You've always told me.
So I was the connector. And the moment that it was revealed that maybe I really wasn't as close to Putin as people thought I was, then Simona starts speaking. She just happens to be blonde, blue-eyed, has an accent. Boom, Russian agent, spy, protecting Papadopoulos. It's a setup.
It's the most incredible nonsense ever. But it's so indicative of a friend of mine is a professor at SC, and he was texting me last night, and he's got a family member with some anxiety issues, and he said, I'm seeing anxiety everywhere. Adults are anxious. Everyone's anxious. I go, yeah, they're anxious. They're being bombarded with nonsense. They're being brought into a emotional state of frenzy by a press that is out of control. I mean, I have journalistic friends that I really respect and love. And then there's everybody else, and I don't know what they're doing.
You know, that's a great segue into what I wanted to ask you, because we are transitioning out. A new story is emerging. You do have the Washington Post and other mainstream media outlets saying that Trump is trying to rewrite history. I don't think we're trying to rewrite anything except really get the true story out for the first time. However, you said something very interesting, that people were connected to this narrative. They have an emotional involvement now.
Your narrative. Well, really, it's your wife's, to be fair.
Yeah.
She goes, everyone just, it's too good. She's too close to the bone on
this
one.
She is. So how can people actually get over that the president and his team were not Russian stooges when the mainstream media for 2 years pounded that in our brain?
Well, I have an image in my head of I forget Cuomo's first name, the CNN correspondent.
Chris Cuomo.
Chris Cuomo, whom I like, and he's a brilliant dude. But I have an image in my head of him sitting in a small box going, this is the day that goes down in infamy. And he said these words, a Russian operative is sitting in the Oval Office. And until something like that is apologized for, until there's a way that people can sort of fall on their swords and take responsibility for the distortions, it's hard for me to believe anything. There's many things that have been said about you, about me. Even when you get retractions, you never get an apology, ever. So I think I would like to see, one thing I would like to see is the press begin to take responsibility for its police itself and ask people to, okay, there's been some journalistic excesses. My bad. I apologize. Just that would go a long way in help. Part of the problem is this thing, right? The screen.
The screen.
People
yeah.
cannot tell the difference between information and knowledge. They just can't. And information is only so deep. And in order to analyze information, you have to have a lot of experience. And information is being sopped up as though it is objective reality. And you can't do that without interfacing with it with an instrument. I hope everyone has one that is accustomed to thinking objectively. No one is, unfortunately. So the second piece of this is the failure of our educational system to help people really be objective evaluators. And until we do that, this will continue to be a threat because people have to be able to take that knowledge. My profession has taken to putting big plaques up in their offices that, frame plaques that say, do not confuse your Google search with my medical training.
Exactly.
Because they do all the time. And they literally don't know the difference.
And disinformation has a real life impact and consequences on everyday life.
Yes.
And I would argue that disinformation resulted in the midterm elections going the Democrat way. I don't think that the Republicans would have lost the House if this narrative of the president and his team working for Russia wasn't so paramount and prominent in the everyday news cycle.
Yeah.
And the question really begets the other one: how do we combat disinformation out there today? Is it education? Is it the media going and I guess retracting what it's done?
The apologies would be nice, but I have no illusions that that's going to happen.
I don't think so either.
So I think it's about just being out there and trying to champion the truth. Unfortunately, you have to take a lot of punches when you do that.
Oh, absolutely. I felt my punches a long time. And,
yeah.
And L.A., you've been in Hollywood. You've been in L.A. for a long time. I'm a newbie here. And you've come out. I don't consider you somebody who is afraid to share his belief.
No, when I know something, it's usually steeped in some sort of clinical reality. Because I have sensibilities that are based on my, I've 3.5 decades as a physician where I had a lot of experience, and a lot of experience where in a way that most clinicians don't even have today, both in psychiatry and in general medicine. And as a result, when I know something to be so, I know it to be so. It's like no, I'm sorry. That's just, I know it. And you develop that kind of certainty when you've seen things thousands of times. And things like what's going on in our street with the homeless population.
Absolutely.
I know what's going on there. Those are my patients. I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what should be done. I know exactly how to correct this thing. And when I started directing my attention towards that, it was not something that I have always been preoccupied with. I've been worried about it. But when I really directed my attention to it about 3 or 4 years ago, I had a daytime radio show. So I was talking to people about it, and I was getting all this rhetoric about housing. And I just thought, well, that's not. Let me take a good look at this and see what's there and see how housing is going to affect that. And I thought, oh, well, that's a hoax. That's a complete hoax. And why are they doing that? Because these are sick people. I know what they need, and that's how I got in. And then the other thing is that, so both as my psychiatric head and my internist head, I looked at all the rodents and I looked at all the excrement. And I thought, oh my God, we have an infectious disease problem too. You
were recently at the White House where you had a meeting with my old boss, Dr. Ben Carson, who is currently the Secretary of HUD.
I had breakfast with him last week.
And
what a great guy! And what a wonderful human being, right? Right? Is there anything bad you say anything bad about that human being?
There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing bad you could say about Doctor. He really is a saint on earth.
I completely agree, and that he's starting to rise up. I think we're starting to see his presence more, and this is a topic that he's taken on very seriously. And when I had my first interaction with him, I've really spent about 3 different occasions with him, and the first time was actually on the phone. And I felt like I was talking to a peer after a night on call and was handing off the cases. He was like, yep, got it. I was just telling him what I was saying on the streets. He's like, yep. Oh, got it. I know what to do. And I was like, yeah, thank you. Take the cases now. Go. And that's when he started really moving on this thing because he took a look, he had the same conclusion I had, and we know what to do. We're clinicians. He's a neurosurgeon. He knows what brain diseases are all about.
So what approach is he taking that, and what advice are you actually giving the administration today? We know that President Trump is in LA today. And he's going to be
No
here.
wonder I had trouble getting around.
I think that's exactly what was going on. I heard the helicopters too around.
Yeah.
But he's in town for 4 days. Some people in the mainstream media have they're kind of shunning his visit here. But at the end of the day, he really is trying to improve the lives of the homeless people living on the streets and to address these psychological woes that the people are facing. So what advice are you giving the administration, and are they taking that into account for the president's trip here?
So the people I have met in the West Wing are brilliant, and Ben Carson being amongst them, and receptive. And they want information. They take it, they assess it, they do their own research. Every interaction I've had with them, what I was telling them was that we have law problems in this state. And in the first meeting I had with them, there was somebody from the Economic Council, again, like crazy bright. I mean, these people, like ridiculous. And he just asked me, he looks at me and he goes, what policy levers can I pull as the federal government? I went, oh, geez. And we started talking about what's called the IMD exclusion, which is something that's been in place since the Johnson administration, and it's insane that it excludes the treatment of the chronically mentally ill. And so you can't get federal resources for no good reason other than it's just been arbitrarily excluded. And that needs to be lifted. And they did a pilot program in D.C., and my understanding is it's now lifted. They're going to grant this funds to the state. Now, God knows what our state will do with it, but that was something that they listened to and took action on immediately. And in fact, every interaction I've had with them, I've had no sense except that what can we do to help people? That's my thing. I'm just out here trying to make life good. I want to do good, help people. And there's a lot of need in our streets right now, so that's where I'm directing my attention. They were just, what can we do? What can we do? How can we help? What can we do to make better? That's all they've ever said to me. So I went there. This is kind of an interesting piece of this story. I went and I gave a talk about the history of how we got in this mess. It was on C-SPAN and stuff. People can probably find it. And it is the systematic dismantling of state mental health systems by the federal government, beginning essentially with the Kennedy administration and the Community Mental Health Act. That's really the bottom line. The intent of that act was to destroy the state health system and make the states dependent on these community outpatient centers who were designed to prevent mental illness. Nothing for the people coming out of the state health system, just prevent future illness, which no one knew how to do then and no one knows how to do now. So it was social engineering on a large scale. It was insane. It was directed by a guy named Robert Felix, who was a disaster. Except for the fact that he set up the National Institute of Mental Health, he was a disaster. And here were non-elected doctors, social engineers. And by the way, there are three of them. There's a guy named Felix, a guy named Yolis, and a guy named Brown. And they'd never taken care of chronically mentally ill ever in their careers. One was like a pediatrician parasitologist before he became a psychiatrist. I mean, they were weak in their psychiatric backgrounds and certainly very weak in chronically psychiatric patients. And they convinced themselves that institutionalization causes mental illness. This is Michel Foucault from ridiculous stuff, as though brain diseases don't exist. So this was insane, and we are still living under the disaster of that. And so they took apart all the hospitals. Patients spilled out into the streets, the prisons, and the nursing homes. Well, they don't belong in the prisons, so this state did things to prevent that. Now they're just in the streets and dying, period. So I gave a little lecture about that, and President Trump followed me at the podium afterwards, and he did not hear my lecture, but they gave him some notes and stuff, and it was really interesting. He clearly hadn't heard my lecture, but that's fine. He's busy. But he goes, I used to walk to school in the morning, and I'd walk by this big hospital. It was a nice hospital with lots of patients in it. But there were thousands of patients in there that had been getting care they needed. He goes, I've always wondered what happened to that. What did we do with that? I know what happened. I know what the consequences have been. We're going to do something about that. And I thought, oh, that's it. That's all I'm looking for. In a nutshell, that was it. It distilled the whole problem down to a little story, and it was exactly the point that there are still people with brain diseases. We're doing nothing for them, and we have to change that. That's it. Very simple. And so he was listening to somebody.
You mentioned that housing is not the solution.
Yeah.
What do you do with these people on the street then if you can't put them in adequate housing? I agree with you because in my opinion, just walking through and seeing this
open air asylum.
Yes.
Let's call it what it is.
That's exactly and that's not even a euphemism.
That's what it is.
That's actually what it is. Yeah.
And there's no fault of the people in the open air asylum.
No,
this is the fault of the people not taking care of the people.
But in their current state, a multi-million-dollar duplex or a complex would result in some sort of dope house eventually. That's how I see it.
Correct. So if you four walls did not. First of all, the schizophrenics can't tolerate being in four walls if they're not treated. The drug addicts will go into the four walls and will die. So you either have you have generally you're trying to treat mental illness with four walls. No. And then they'll sort of give a passing nod to, well, we need wraparound services, as though that's something, educational or something. That's psychiatric care. Wraparound services, the only institutions that give wraparound services are psychiatric hospitals. That's how we invented wraparound services. We gave, in a psychiatric hospital, you had a psychiatrist, a physician, a psychologist, a social worker, vocational rehab, an occupational therapist. That's wraparound services. Yes, they need wraparound services in an environment that's appropriate for rendering wraparound services, which is not a condominium. So something like the Trieste plan or the Haven House plan, which is now Robert Marbut's plan. He's got a homeless czar now. And that is generally their plan to create stuff like that. Trieste is opening in Hollywood. The problem is these are small, and they need to scale up in some way. Catherine Barger is opening more psychiatric beds. I mean, it's around the margins things are happening, finally. But I still think this problem is going to be alive and well and with us for a few years.
It seems that the state of California is more proud of being called the so-called resistance state and suing the federal government than anything, while some of these prescriptions that you're addressing that do come from the federal government seem to be blocked by the state here, because the state
to the detriment of the citizens.
To the detriment.
This is the problem. No concern for the well-being of the citizens, just ideology. That's the problem. In all respects, ideology prevails over the well-being of the citizens. That's the problem we're dealing with the homeless. There's an ideological bent there.
Yes.
And as far as it pertains to suing the federal government, I talked to Jeff Sessions about this too. I said, help me understand something. The last time that a state was in open defiance of federal instructions, we called that an insurrection, and that was South Carolina in 1860. How do we justify what California is doing? They're out of alignment with the Union. And that is actually one of my philosophical concerns right now, which is that because we don't educate people about the ideas. This is the only country founded on ideas, not on a history, not on anything, just a bunch of ideas. And we're not educating people about those ideas, so there's nothing to unite us. They don't even understand the ideas. And I've noticed lately that the most fundamental idea at the basis of our government has been under assault, which is we the people to form a more perfect union of the states. It's a union of state. It's not a federal oversight or a federal, what would you call it? A federal state. It's not a federal state. It's a union of independent states. That was the idea. If you get rid of the Electoral College, or if you sit in insurrection like California is, that is the basis of our Constitution that you're flying in the face of, is it not? Am I wrong? It really worries me.
I agree. And we also, we've talked about some of the deleterious health consequences of the homelessness crisis that have emerged. I'm relatively new to the state. I've had the privilege to live here just about 2 years now. And I've been told by people who have been here a lot longer than that this is the worst it's ever been. And you're starting to see some sort of viruses and diseases that we haven't seen since the Dark Ages in Europe.
Absolutely correct. Well,
with Corona as well.
Well, right. So
can you talk
here's
about that a bit.
Two things. So one is 3 people die every freaking day in LA County, homeless. 3 homeless people dying every day. The majority is drug addict, but there's other, exposure and heart disease and infections. 3 a day are dying. If we had 3 deaths a day from coronavirus in this city, you imagine the outcry? Can you imagine the outrage? No, nothing. Silence on the homeless. So let's talk about the infectious disease problem.
Yes.
Because that's how I got into this. So the whole reason I started looking at homeless is my own home became overrun with rats. I mean, we were just overrun, and we couldn't control them. We tried every humane way possible, and we were just overrun. And we finally got it under control with pesticides, which you can now no longer use in this state, which is brilliant.
Did you have your beautiful dogs back then when the rodents
We had the dogs. We didn't have cats. We had dogs.
The dogs are afraid of the rats. The cats aren't.
Our dogs hate the cats, and they hate we have the whole animal kingdom in our backyard, but they hate the rats and the birds particularly. There's a bird that actually comes in our house every day, and it freaks the hell out of my dog. My dog's a big Australian Shepherd. And he runs behind the house and hides when the bird comes in and picks stuff off our floor. So we were overrun by rats, and I started thinking about it. I thought, this isn't right. This is really abnormal. And I started tracking it sort of through the neighborhood, and it's at the homeless encampment down in the Arroyo. There's just rats everywhere. It's just out of control. And then I started looking at downtown Los Angeles, and there's an NBC reporter named Joel Grover that was doing report after report about the massive, multi-million population of rats downtown that were not being addressed by the city at all. We're one of the only cities in the country that doesn't have a rodent control plan. And they kept going to the mayor going, what's your plan for this? What's your plan? And I thought, oh my God, because I practiced medicine over against the foothills for so many years, I thought you get a rodent population like this, we're going to have a typhus outbreak for sure. It came. My son had the typhus was everywhere. It went all the way downtown, and it went all the way to Long Beach, which I thought was fascinating because I've never seen it. We have typhus endemically in Pasadena and up in the foothills, but I'd never seen it go all the way to the beach. It was like ridiculous. And so it was a big outbreak. They denied it. It actually hit somebody in City Hall. They said it was because of construction. I mean, this is really duplicitous, dangerous, really, as a physician, outrageous position the city was taking. So this is what got me going. I'm like, wait a minute, you can't do this. And then I realized so here's how my thinking went. So I started looking at the homeless going, oh my God, what a mess. This is psychiatric, but we have these infectious disease problems too. I started talking to infectious disease doctors. Yes, tuberculosis is up, but worse, non-tuberculous AFB, something called M. avium, massively increased. We're going to start seeing that in the general public soon. And it's a bad disease. So M. avium up. Then as I was watching, we had a salmonella outbreak, typhoid fever in a police precinct. Typhoid fever? It's ridiculous.
What year was this?
This is 18 months ago.
This is recent?
Yes. Oh. Typhoid fever. And so tuberculosis, non-tuberculous AFB. And I'm looking at what we're doing here with 60,000 people on the streets. Their excrement and urine and blood and needles are going into the LA River. They actually hose it down into the LA River, and when it rains, that then flows directly to the ocean, bypassing sewage treatment. And I confronted one of the Gila Bay people. I said, what? Of course the beaches are all shut down. What are you doing with it? It's like the city the size of Arcadia sewage is going directly to the ocean. We have sea mammal die-off. We have sea bird die-off. What? Of course. You know what the response was to me?
What?
Well, those people have to wash in the river. I was like, what? What do you mean the homeless have to wash in the river? I mean, that begs the. What are you talking about? we have a massive problem here. They refuse to address it. So there's that. And then I started talking to experts about the rodents and typhus and endemic illness in Southern California. And it occurred to me that we have another organism that is in the pool here. It's in bats and raccoons and feral cats. And I thought, this is going to get into the rats. I know it. There's a disease called Yersinia pestis.
What's that?
You know it as bubonic plague.
Yeah, okay.
And so I talked to some plague experts. The last plague outbreak in this country was in the 1920s in Los Angeles because of a rodent bloom. same exact situation. And it was only because of some heroic efforts at controlling the rodent population that this didn't become a widespread epidemic. Everyone near the case one died. 11 people died within a week.
Do we still not have a rodent policy here? You mentioned that California is the only state that doesn't.
No. LA is the only major city that doesn't have one. And I had heard there was a
It's only the second biggest city in the country.
I know. I'd heard there was a rodent committee forming, but I don't see any plan, and certainly no reduction in the rodent population. I know they're out there doing haphazard stuff, but I've spoken to people in that business of pest control, and they're like, they're not really doing anything. And it's very, very, very concerning to them because they know the diseases that can be transmitted by all this. So and now if something like measles gets into that population or coronavirus gets into it, this is going to be devastation. It's going to be to the homeless themselves. Forget what it means if it breaks in the general population.
Who live among us, by the way.
Everywhere. I
live in Hollywood, in the Hollywood Hills, and I walk 10 minutes outside my house, and there's a community of homeless people. To no fault of their own, because we've been.
You're way up here too.
Oh, yeah.
They're just a spot. They take it,
and they take it, and I see needles, I see blood, I see feces, and who knows if I walk into it? What if I walk and I bring it into my house, and then I have my wife at home, I have friends. You never know what can be transmitted into your house.
You're supposed to take your shoes off after you've been in those encampments now.
Well, that's exactly why I always do take off my shoes, especially since I've been living here. Because
it is great. Listen, This is why before I started really focusing in on what we can do to help the mentally ill, I kept saying that the reason humans can congregate in these things we call cities is they solved the sanitation problem. And the first thing they did was control rodents because they were the killing people. And we've somehow decided, this government has decided that, we don't need to. Civilization begs no, we don't need to deal with this, the basics of civilization anymore. We're way beyond that. No, you're not. You don't attend to the basic needs of civilization, nature will come in, will step in, and it will be catastrophic. So I'm waiting for that. I hope we do something before that happens, but that's the real concern right now.
Well, what do you think about things like the president is talking about? Something that I also support as a citizen is just, I don't want to call it forcefully removing people off the streets and putting them in a temporary housing solution. But what do you think about that?
So there's two kinds of, I'm not into forcing anybody to do anything, but I'm into motivating them because I know that's what these people need. I know that was my specialty in motivating drug addicts.
How do you motivate them?
Well, you have to have a big sword. You have to have a sword. You have to have consequences. You have to have, because the people that are in the streets, if you have such severe mental illness that you lose everything and end up in the street, that is as severe as mental illness gets.
Yes.
So let's not kid ourselves. That's when it's advanced. You end up in the streets. And when people are in that state, most of them, and I'll say virtually all, have a condition called anosognosia. And it's more commonly an addiction just called denial. But anosognosia is a more biological phenomenon where you're blocked in your ability to see the consequences of your condition and your choices. You just can't see it. And so only 10% of people with drug addiction get treatment. When you study that 90% that didn't get treatment, you know why they didn't get treatment?
They're in denial.
80% of them say, I don't want it, I don't need it, why would I do that? And then they die. Yeah. It's a fatal illness. So that's the piece. And of course, the bipolar manics and the schizophrenics and the schizoaffectives, they don't have the insight until you treat them. And then, by the way, once you treat them and get them off the street, they look back at the squalor that people left them in, they are pissed. Who left me like that? Why did you? And now we have a bill in Sacramento. If any of your listeners can possibly twist the arm of Sacramento,
let's hear it.
We have a bill, SB 640 up there, which is designed to modify the Lanterman-Petras Short Act, which is the bill we have since the early 70s. Again, it's a 50-year-old law that determines how we're able to approach people with mental illness. It's the foundational. And as it is now and been interpreted over the years, the only way you can get somebody into care is if they say they're going to kill themselves or kill somebody else. And they have to keep saying it or you have to let them out. That's essentially the way it is. And the whole gravely disabled part is very vague and very weak. And so you really can't do anything with people that are dying and disconnected and can't care for their basic needs. You can't do anything. So one of the state senators from Orange County brought up dozens of families and families who have money and resources and doctors. Please help us bring our loved one home. The schizophrenia has them going out on the street. They don't want to take their medicines. If we had some ability to hold them for a few weeks in our house, we could get the medicines in them. We could help them. We give them the long-acting shots. They'd clear. Please give us the authority to help our loved ones. They were told just to F off. How dare you? Who do you think you are?
To tell somebody how to live their life.
Exactly.
Even though they're dying.
Correct. So the idea, because of the ideology again, is essentially that brain diseases don't exist. That your brain's always a perfectly functioning unit with autonomous agency.
So homeless people are as much part of the social fabric and the culture as you. And as graffiti on the walls. It's just part of the city. It's what makes the city what it is.
They don't even go that far. They don't even, it's just, this is just somebody's choice. And how dare you question agency or functioning of their brain.
Now, what would passing this bill that you mentioned do for this issue?
It would give us a definition of gravely disabled that would allow us to take people that are dying and bring them into treatment and give families the ability to hold people and be able to get conservatorships in situations where they remain gravely disabled.
I view this as a battlefield, actually. And in a war, what you do is you build makeshift hospitals and bunkers that you bring in.
Well, this is your other point about the short-term thing.
The short-term, yes.
Yeah. So that is what has somebody been pros, these sprung tents to bring people in and triage them. And I'm all for that because we got to know what we're dealing with, right? Until we triage things. Right now, the only data we have is like some adolescent out there with a clipboard. Hey, you have mental illness? No? Okay, got it. You do drugs? Do you do drugs? No? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The data is totally totally wrong. You need people who are trained in mental health, who know how to do the mental status examination to document what is going on in that person's brain. And
Absolutely.
Once we have all that from these 60,000 plus that are on our streets, then we can talk about what to do about this and what needs to be done. We will know specifically. It's bizarre to me that physicians aren't more involved with this. It's like only politicians involved.
When I see the homeless people in my area, I'm just talking about them, I don't even think they know that those solutions do exist or that they might exist in the future. And I think if somebody did go up to them and tell them, look, we do have this situation for you where we could bring you in, diagnose you, and treat you.
Most will not go.
It's that bad?
Yeah, they will not go.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the part. That's the dirty little secret in all this.
Okay.
People you behave as though they would be open to getting off the streets. No, most of them would not. Now, not all of it. You'd make a big dent. You'd make a big dent. You'd probably get 20% right away. And so, again, I'm all for it. Let's do something. The really hard question is once we've triaged them and we've got the set, understand what we're dealing with, then what? Because we don't have enough psychiatric beds. I'm meeting with the Southern California Hospital Association in a couple of days because they're freaked out. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Medicare never pays their bills. Medicare won't cover these people. You expect us to absorb all this? What are we supposed to do? What are we going to do? We don't have the beds. We don't have the facilities. We're not being reimbursed for our services. How do we manage this? And I'm going to defer that to the federal government because that's a Medicaid kind of question.
What can Medicaid do then from the federal government for just cover them, give them
problem
a blanket coverage, you think?
No, the problem is they turn it over to California and then it becomes Medi-Cal.
Yeah.
And Medi-Cal administration is draconian. And that's why most people won't deal with Medi-Cal because so unless the federal government sort of somehow pushes the propriety of care, like you make certain minimum standards to give them the federal grants. I got to go talk to them about this. I didn't really thought about this till just now.
Okay.
But this is a piece that needs to be in place because I'll get more information from the hospital, the Southern California Hospital Association, because I'm sure they'll have specifics on this.
We've talked about psychiatry, mental health, the administration, homelessness, and people being stuck in their own ways. So the next question, I think, kind of fits into all of this. Do you think there is a diagnosis for Trump derangement syndrome out there?
I think you just made it. I think TDS, TDS, but it's uncanny for some people. It bothers me that people are so. They get so affected, but in a way, so I was very agnostic about President Trump when he was running president. I didn't understand his candidacy. I didn't, and I was running. I was doing a CNN program. It was actually on essentially CNN 2 on HLN, and I would bring in an audience of all Trump supporters, and it was a very diverse group. It wasn't what you think, and I would just go, what do you, what is this? What do you see here? Why are you supporting this guy? I don't, he scares me. What are you seeing?
What were they telling you back then? I'm interested in
that. It was really more about feeling that the government had gotten away and was marching in a direction that didn't represent them, particularly economically. They felt like this guy was going to help me, and and I was going to share in some. I think I really could never get my head around it, I got to tell you. They definitely wanted to throw a stick of dynamite into Washington. They were sort of frustrated with Washington. They just wanted to do this, and that's scary, right? And I understand that's scary to people. But then I have many friends that you can't bring it up without them just going into this state. And before I saw that happen to my friends, the first person I saw that happen to was ex-President Fox of Mexico.
Tell me about that.
Do you remember him, his thing? Trump said when he was the candidate that he was going to make Mexico pay for the wall.
Is that when he said, "Fuck you, Trump, I'm not paying for the wall"? Is that what you're talking about?
But he went berserk.
I remember that, yeah.
He went like he did not look right. And then President Trump went, see, I can't deal with these people. They're crazy. I don't know. And then I started seeing him doing that to lots of people. So there's something about his style.
He breaks them.
He makes them react in a way that they look not sane. My friends are very guilty of this too. I can't quite get my head around what it is, but it's something about him that he does that to people, to certain kinds of people.
What is it? What do you think it is? Because people use the word triggered. They use
not the trigger.
They use snowflake. I don't know what people are using nowadays, but something triggers them. And they don't even understand why. A lot of people, you'll see reporters go out there, they'll ask questions. So why don't you like him? Oh, he's this, he's this. But give me an example of how he behaves in this. And they can't give an example. So what is the trigger?
It is the rhetorical style, right?
It's the style, okay.
It is, and I think it's that they feel like he doesn't care about the truth. Like what I would say back is, do any politicians care about the truth? This one, you can just see where the inaccuracies are, and that he doesn't back off gets very frustrating for people, right? And for me, I started seeing it around the time of his inauguration. Like, no, don't you know that's not how many people were there? He says there were this many, there were that many, and they'll just spin on it all day. And so there's something about the disregard for their need for something like a reinforcement of their truth or something that gets scary. And I get that. I get that that's disturbing to people.
Do you think that half of the country loves him and hates him because he is a disruptor, and I guess you really can't control him in many ways? He is,
and that's scary. That is scary, right?
I guess that is why some people feel that, because he is not a controllable person and he's beholden to no one.
Right. He doesn't seem to care.
But to the other half, they love him because of that.
Exactly.
So how do you explain that?
You just did it. I mean, there's some people that know. So here's where I came in. I was thinking to myself, he kind of bothered me at first. I was like, Jesus, is this going to be okay? It's scary, right? And then there was this Yale psychiatrist that came out and said that he's a malignant narcissist and he's dangerous and he's inciting violence. And remember that whole story?
I do remember that. I think you were on there talking about it.
I interviewed her.
How did that go?
So I said, you have to be careful about how, first of all, diagnosing people you don't know. She agreed, yes, of course, but the stakes are so high. It's causing violence in the society. Okay. And I said, but let me just describe a couple other people to you. Let's see if they should be president. I said, this guy used to wander around the night and beat people up if he thought they were out of line. He held a high position in government but had no authority and bought battleships because he thought it was important to do. And he couldn't take meetings sitting down. He was so manic. You had to follow him through. He'd have to walk through the park while he had his meetings because he couldn't sit still. And he was terribly emotionally disconnected. He had his children died of alcoholism, and and he was just grandiose and extremely manic and wealthy guy. Should that guy be president? She's like, absolutely not. This is be a catastrophe. And I go, okay, well, that's Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt. So I said, okay. So, well,
and the Rough Riders.
Yeah, which, by the way, if you read his stuff, he was nutty as can be. And he was my favorite president until I started looking at him with a clinical eye and going, oh my God, he is really nutty. But okay, it was the right thing for that moment of history. And I am too limited to know what history needs. We've had a lot of crazy people in the White House. So I proposed this to the psychiatrist. I go, here's another one. This guy is on mercury, takes mercury because he's obsessed that he has syphilis. He is so profoundly depressed that his friends have had to sit vigil on him because they were sure he was going to kill himself. There's a story of him pulling his son in a wagon down a major thoroughfare, and the son spilled out, and the wagon was upside down, and he was in such a depressive fugue, he continued down for another half a mile before he realized he goes, is that somebody we want as president? Absolutely not. Okay, well, that's Abraham Lincoln. Okay. And it's like, I just get relative, it's too grand a position for me to know who should be a given person at a moment in history. I know that he's scary to people. I get that. And it feels to them like words like honor and morality, or not morality even, that doesn't come in. He's not honorable. I hear that from my African-American friends. And then I hear the truth stuff from my Caucasian friends. He's not truthful. How can you defend somebody that's such a liar? Those are the two things that come flying back at me on the Trump derangement syndrome. And thankfully, I'm such a moderate. I'm agnostic on everything. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on here. But I do see that seems to be President Trump's mechanism. That is something, he probably did it in business, right? He probably Merv Griffin went nuts when didn't he have a whole thing with him over the Taj Mahal? And he sort of, isn't that what he wrote The Art of the Deal about, was how he hoodwinked Merv Griffin? And I bet there was, not hoodwinked, but out negotiated him. And probably there was a moment where Griffin spiraled into God knows what. So
in many ways, he is the most transparent president in history because he has had such a long life in the public eye. I mean,
he's never. That's what I keep telling people. He's never other than what he is.
Exactly.
He's always the same, including this business of making people crazy.
Good
because
or
I'm
bad,
like, why do you fall for
is.
that? Why do you know what he's going to say when you get crazy? He's going to say you're not stable, and he's right.
He really has been in the public eye. He says what he does, and he made promises, and that he's keeping. So I'm not sure exactly why. First of all, the honorable and the truth. Okay, people could have their own perceptions, but in reality, he is keeping the promises that he did make, whether you agree or you don't.
More than most politicians, right? More than most politicians do.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Which is the interesting conundrum. I think that's why there will be a re-election, right?
Absolutely.
Is because there are enough people that are looking at that going, well, okay.
Well, there are rumors that, well, I know you've put some water on some of them, but I'm here to ask you directly about your political aspirations. Yeah. What's going on with that?
There's zero. There's a zero. So this is I did a little beta test on the press. If you're ready to talk about more press distortions, I was on Adam Carolla's podcast, and I'm upset. Every day I'm upset about this homeless thing. It just morally affects me. 3 people will die today as we're sitting here on our ass. It just kills me. I can't stand it as a doctor. So I'm always like, what am I going to do? And of course, political operatives started coming around me. You need to run for mayor. I'm like, I don't live in Los Angeles. I don't want to live in Los Angeles. You need to be governor. I don't want to live in Sacramento. And that does not look like a very thankful job. But then I was telling Adam, I go, I realized, I think I'm in Schiff's district. Maybe I had to run for that guy's office. That's all I said.
Yeah.
And then somebody from the Hill comes along and goes, we want to interview about this. I have a policy where I will not do print interviews because they are distorted every time.
They are.
Have you ever heard of Gelman amnesia?
No.
It's a great story. There's a famous physicist named Dr. Gelman. Gelman amnesia, a famous physicist named Gelman, whenever he went to the paper and read a story about physics, it was completely wrong. And then he'd read the rest of the paper and assume they got that all right. It's called Gelman amnesia. They distort everything in the press, everything. And if it's about you or a topic you know a lot about, it's glaring how distorted everything is. So having been the object of print that's just outrageously distorted so many times, I just stopped doing print interviews. I won't do it. And this woman called, and I said, all right, I'll tell you what. I said, if you transcribe what I tell you and you publish the transcription, I'll do it. And she did. And I really appreciate that. And then every other press outlet in print distorted everything I said.
Even though it was their verbatim.
It was their verbatim. They didn't check with me. They didn't check with her. They just stored the shit out of it. He's running for Schiff's office immediately. He's talking about running. He says he's going to be in the primary.
He's visiting the White House. He's getting
exactly. So again, the narrative that they wanted.
You're a Trumper now, Dr. Drew.
I know the narrative. I am moderate. I'm a nothing. I'm a zero. And I'm not running for Schiff's office. Though, if this homeless problem is not solved soon, I'm going to run for something because I just can't sit still. I can't live with it. I can't abide by it.
What do you think that something would be? How do you think you could?
I don't know. It depends what the things look like in a couple of years. I don't know.
And you think things are going to get worse? The way you see things going based on the meetings you're having?
We are starting to have real effects around the margins. It's starting to get better around the margins. My fear is it could be too little too late. We'll see. We'll see how much actually gets done. I was at a meeting of the Schwarzenegger Foundation last week. That's where I sat at breakfast with Ben Carson.
I saw.
And was
even Arnold came out and supported.
He was great.
Yeah,
I was inspired by several of the speakers, Ben Carson amongst them. And then the rest, I was jumping out of my skin.
Can you give us some insight into what was going on at that breakfast?
He and I talking about. Well, we were with Catherine Barger, who is the president of the chairperson of the LA County Board of Supervisors, and she gets it, and she is only interested in making good, helping things, and she's the one that's really doing things around the margins. But that's way out in Palmdale and stuff like that. It's not so much here where you can see the change. And we were just talking about what we think needs to be done, and I was educating him about that SB 640, and he was talking about that he was going to come in and make a real difference, and he was going to work with the leaders here until they made a visible change. And they have boots on the ground here. They have people here that are from the federal government trying to work with all the different levels of city and county and state officials to provide federal services where they can. We talked a little bit about SAMHSA, and what SAMHSA could do, which is really the mental health limb. It's not a policy limb, though, right? They don't have money so much, but they have the ability to train and to advise.
And can the federal government apportion a budget to this branch to make it a policy?
SAMHSA? No. But SAMHSA can come in and establish best practices, right? And then the federal government can go, how are we going to do that? Let's make sure we have the money to do it, and how are we going to create those policy structures to do so. It's daunting when you look at it, because really, think about it. LA County is mental health, right? The counties deal with the mental health. The state create the legal structure in which that is delivered. That's where our problem is. The federal government can only do so much.
The president is in town. What is your message to the president?
Take your shoes off if you're going to go visit our downtown situation after you've done so. My message would be go down and take a look at things. Take a look at what we got. Don't shrink away from it. These are your people. These are your citizens, and you should want to help them. That's my message. And I think if you see the squalor, it will help motivate you.
I agree. I myself did a lot of my community service at the Union Rescue. In Skid Row
with Reverend Bales.
Yes,
that's an awesome thing, and that was
beautiful.
By the way, that's one of the things we talked to Ben Carson about in great detail, was how the faith-based community can get involved here. Because let's be fair, throughout history, the faith-based community did a lot of this work and did it well. And to sort of exclude them from the process is insane. In the name of what? This is my constant question to everybody. These civil rights in the name of what? Excluding faith-based in the name of what? Some abstract principle of the division of church and state? The founding fathers never imagined that you wouldn't join hands with a faith-based community that is solving a massive health problem. Are you kidding? And same with the civil rights. What civil rights? To allow people to die? That's civil rights? In the name of what? I
could not imagine what Skid Row would look like. I mean, as bad as it is right now, if the Union Rescue was not situated right there.
Well, and there's the LA Mission and the Union Mission. There's two big ones, and they're both extremely good.
And they're faith-based.
Which is why they've been excluded from the conversation. And believe me, no one knows better what's going on down there than these guys. Did you ever see the book, the movie The Soloist?
No, I haven't.
It's with Jamie Foxx and Robert Downey Jr. It's about 10, 15 years old. If you want to have a good exploration of a homeless person and what you're up against with one case with schizophrenia, it's a really good little discussion about it. It's outdated in the sense that it's biased against pharmacotherapeutic interventions, which are much more advanced now. But the issues still prevail. They're still relevant to the issues of today.
Wonderful.
It's called The Soloist. Yeah.
Check that out, definitely.
Yeah.
Max, do you have any questions you wanted to that you want to think of?
Have you?
Let's chime in. Producer Max over here, he has a couple questions for you, Drew.
Max, the voice of God.
The coronavirus. I mean, what do you think that's being underplayed by China? Are we taking it seriously enough? Are they taking it seriously enough?
It's more U.S. press shenanigans, right? How many people have died of coronavirus in the United States?
Zero.
How many people have died of influenza of this year?
Hundreds, thousands.
18,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
Last I checked, it might have been a little less, like 16,000, with 180,000 seriously ill flu sufferers. Why aren't they reporting about that? Why isn't there a report like, hey, thank God they're controlling this Wuhan outbreak because it can get bad. Look at the flu. Get your flu shot. That should be the study. That should be that should be their message if they were actually responsible. Instead, it's 2,000 dead, 2,000 dead, 2,000 dead. And you notice it's plateauing, right? It went to 800 very fast, and then bing, 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 and now it's starting to plateau. And so it will have a greater reach for sure. My suspicion is it's more mild than the press is allowing you to believe. I mean, how many thousands of cases now, and only 800? How many dead? 1,000 dead?
I think there's like 1,000 or 1,500.
It really seems like
that to me is like a very low lethality.
I don't know why China is reacting the way it is, though. From just watching some videos that people are releasing, it seems that the Chinese government is going around knocking people's doors down, throwing them in quarantine.
Yes,
it's incredible. What's that?
I think it's out of fear of being seen as not doing enough. And it is they're in a panic as well because of the press, right? So they're in fear of disrupting economic activity nationwide. They're in fear of being accused of not doing enough. And so they're doing a lot. And here's the other thing that people got to get through their head. This country behaves as though China is medically and scientifically, old men with herbs crushed up behind a bunch of wooden, drawers. The center of gravity of medical research is China and England, not the United States. They have exceptionally good medical science in China. All the wisdom of the Orient that we are into here, they ain't interested in. They're scientists, and they are smart, and they're solving problems. So do not pretend to think that we're somehow so much more advanced. Do you notice how that's sort of the posture?
Yes.
It's sort of
that they're crushing up tiger teeth.
There are still cultural remnants of all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on. But the establishment in China is science, and they're good at it. So please stop it. That's racist, in my humble opinion. And let them. They're overreacting, but they're doing a decent job of it. The the World Health Organization, has been in there. They look at what they're doing. If there were a problem, you would hear about it from the World Health Organization and the CDC. Look to Anthony Fauci if you want to know. When the bell rings on trouble, he will tell you.
We'll check that out. I have a question. I know a lot of our viewers wanted me to ask you this question because I think it goes directly into their own households, and that's mandatory vaccines and vaccinations. What's your opinion on mandatory vaccines?
Yeah, so I am sympathetic to the idea. I'm kind of libertarian at heart.
Because we did talk about not forcefully removing people from the street.
Yeah.
So how can we forcefully inject?
Right. And by the way, I didn't finish my thought on forcefully removing people from the street. We are not talking about dialing it back to the excesses of psychiatry in the 1950s. Nobody's talking about that. We are talking about the brain science has evolved over the last 70 years, nearly 100 years, and the laws are still a response to the excesses of nearly 100 years ago. And we've moved along since then. We now understand what these things are, and we have good treatments for them. Let the laws reflect that. That was that piece. And we know that certain people do need mandated care, and that should be provided. But to most people, motivated care is much more effective. So I want to see motivated care. And there are ways to motivate. I used to do that all the time. There are ways to motivate people, trust me. And you can break through the anosognosia with threat, with things that they don't want to do. They'll do B. And they feel much better when they do B. So I am philosophically not for the government forcing us to do anything, except this is one area where if we are to be called citizens that support, we've somehow gotten so involved in the rights of the individual that we've forsaken the rights of the group. But we've also forsaken the obligation we have as citizens. I would argue we have an obligation to our fellow citizens to be vaccinated for certain illnesses.
Interesting.
I have an obligation to you to not carry an infection into your household. And by the way, even if you're vaccinated, if the pool is big enough, we could break through your vaccine. I have an obligation to you to make sure, not as a physician, as a fellow citizen, to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's vaccination.
Well, a personal anecdote or story, I guess, is Simona, my wife. We're going through the whole great.
I think I know her. I think I met
Yeah.
her. Oh, the Moscow. Yeah.
And I still have
the spy.
Yeah. Well, I imported a Russian spy here. I mean, no one has. In case anybody hasn't realized that I'm in.
If you did, you are good, man, because I've known you for a while now, and if that's really what happened, woo, you're good.
Well, what do you think all the public stuff was? Obviously, it was the cover. I mean, you do what they don't expect you to do.
Right.
So you have a Russian agent married to you. You don't hide them living in your house. You put them out there as a supportive wife, the girlfriend.
And you dupe guys like me. And
then you dupe the world, and then the rest is history. Then you upend an entire narrative that changes history.
Right.
Isn't that insane?
Well done. Well done.
That's real disinformation.
You are a genius.
But she is going through the green card process now. We've been married close to 2 years. We're going on our 2-year anniversary next month. So I'm very happy about that. Thank you. And she was horrified because as she's going through her paperwork and stuff, she had to then go for her medical.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we have to inject you with like 14 different vaccines now. And something I did not know. I mean, she got her vaccines.
Good.
But something that...
She has autism now? No. Okay.
Well, that's what people are afraid of, I guess. Here's something that struck me as odd. And I don't know, maybe if she didn't understand it or she did, but I want to ask you about this. Apparently, if you have a chronic disease like AIDS or cancer of some nature, as a foreigner, even if you're married to an American, you're not allowed into this country?
Not allowed in or not allowed to be a citizen?
Not allowed to be a citizen.
Yeah.
Is that true? What's that all about?
I don't know, but that should be changed. That's not okay.
That absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because
so there's so much room for immigration reform. I mean, come on. That's just one of the little things.
Yeah, but I just
I bet it's some weird anachronism. There's so many anachronisms in our law, things left over from historical past that have no relevance to the medical reality of the present.
But, well, I mean, you mentioned autism, and you're a doctor. Is there a correlation?
It's been looked at.
What do the studies show?
Show clearly, no.
There is none.
Clearly, yeah, clearly. Now, then people will go to, well, what about the fund to treat people who have adverse vaccine reactions?
Yes.
Yeah. People, there's nothing you can ingest or inject to a human that doesn't have risk. Nothing. You take Tylenol, take 8 of those pills, your liver can shut down if you're a bit of a drinker. So please, there's no such thing as I was raised by a family practitioner, and he always told me, it was like, do not take medicine unless it's worth the risk, and that better be really worth it.
And that includes Tylenol, for example.
Everything.
Wow.
And I remember the first time I took an antibiotic, I was like 15 years old, and my dad really was like, here we go, here it is, you're gonna do it, and we'll see what happens.
I had the opposite. My father's a doctor, and he would pump me if I had a cough, he would give me antibiotics.
Give you codeine.
Maybe that. Hey, I don't get sick anymore, so something must have worked.
Well, it's good genes. So I have a healthy respect for. Look, if you walk over the threshold of a doctor's office, we can do bad things to you. It's called iatrogenic medicine. Things can happen just by virtue of interacting with the medical system. So I'm not closed to the reality. But people are not accustomed to doing risk-benefit analysis.
Without,
They don't. That's again back to where we started. Because they have some information that tells them,
Absolutely.
oh my God, this vaccine had bad reactions. They can't, and we are extremely bad at assessing probabilities. Our brain doesn't work well like that. So 1 out of 100,000, if it's me, it's 100%.
yes.
It's not going to, you're more likely to win the lottery than have an adverse reaction, like a true adverse reaction. Come on. And you're very likely to get these illnesses by comparison that we're trying to protect you against.
Which are far more dangerous.
And our brain can't do it. Our brain can't make those probabilistic assessments. And that's part of this thing we started talking about of knowledge and wisdom versus information.
What about, I have another question. What do you think of the FDA and the vaping kind of decision?
I think they made a good move. I think
Is vaping, how does it compare to smoking and
way better, infinitely better.
better for it?
Way better than tobacco.
Right.
Way better. People went into a moral panic around vaping.
Right.
And unfortunately, those bootleg cannabis vapes caused that crazy lung syndrome that really freaked people out. And the government actually did a really good job of analyzing the risks of vaping. They have a huge encyclical out that full of very good science. And there are only 2 things that fall out of it if you read it. If you have asthma, you should not vape. That's clear. And if you're a long-term vapor, there is some, if you do long-term vaping, there's some evidence that some precancerous changes in lung cells in vitro, meaning outside of the human, that were concerning enough to say, I'm not sure I can sign off on long-term vaping because of that. But if it means, if the diathesis is between cigarettes and vaping, I will take vaping every time. And there's tons of literature out there that show vaping is the best way to get people off cigarettes.
So didn't the government say that, flavored vapes are no longer
out, because that's where the theory goes that that's directed towards adolescents, and if you expose the adolescent brain to nicotine, and again, people get very confused about nicotine versus cigarettes. Nicotine is not the harmful part of cigarettes. Nicotine is the addictive part. And we don't want people necessarily addicted to nicotine. And there's concern there may be some psychiatric things down the road from that. So I'm totally on board with, we don't want to adolescents vaping nicotine if we can avoid it. And one of the roads to nicotine addiction in adolescence, which by the way is much more difficult to treat later in life, is through the flavored vapes. So okay, no flavored vapes to young people. Reasonable. Do you think they should have gone further?
I don't think they should have
done that even.
Done that, no.
Libertarian over
Yeah.
So, yeah, listen, I was talking to Kat Timpf last night, who's Fox News person, and she's a hardcore libertarian. And she goes, crack addicts, heroin addicts, do what you want. And I thought, yeah, I'm sort of on board with that, except there's a reality to this, and it's very much what we've done on the streets of Los Angeles, is you're committing them to die. These are progressive illnesses that end in death. And yes, we don't want them in prison, but we need to have some way of intervening, even if it's just to administer their heroin. If that's what you want to do, have nurses administering the heroin and monitoring them, okay, that's something. But we got to do something or you're killing them. And so my opinion is that not doing anything is murder. It's passive murder. It just can't be called anything else. And now we have a genocide in our streets. We have laws that are murderous, and we have people defending the murder.
Can't do that.
Can't do that.
Dr. Drew, I just have a last question for you.
That's it? My last question?
We have one more, unless Max, because I know I don't want to keep you forever, but I could keep you here forever if you want. Well, there are worse places to be.
I've blown hard enough. This is a great studio,
there are worse places to be
way
than the world.
Worse.
My opinion on Trump and Hollywood is when he is reelected, which I think is a certainty, and based on, now that the Mueller hoax and he was acquitted from impeachment. And
is he going to go after all that stuff, do you think? Because Giuliani keeps going, wait till you hear, it's coming soon. It's like, what is he talking about? What is he talking about?
It's all about investigating the investigators.
Yeah.
And it's really all about...
But already McCabe's off, right? No big deal.
Well, he's off for one issue. But there's also this new investigation, the John Durham probe, that really delves into how the whole probe into Russia really started. was it a setup? Is it a dirty trick? If not, I mean, I talk about it. I was just on Fox a couple days ago on Shannon Bream's show talking about this two-tier justice system in this country, which I don't think is sustainable. If you're going to have a constitutional republic actually work, you can't have a two-tier justice system, because then the rule of law does not exist. Without the rule of law, you don't have sovereignty, and then you just really have no trust in these institutions that we as Americans should believe protect us. And then that really will corrode a government and a country from within far worse than any foreign or external power.
That was the foreign
possibly
fathers.
can.
Our
Absolutely.
founding fathers were always worried about what we do to ourselves. That was the greatest concern.
And what worse way to kill ourselves than to prop up people who have been referred for prosecution, like Andy McCabe. Andy McCabe is not an angel. I mean, he was referred for prosecution. It's not like he was just attacked by the president and nothing happened to him. He admitted he lied. He admitted he leaked, which are both felonies, but nothing happened to him. And a lot of people, especially on the right, are very pissed, thinking, what's going on here? Why is it only people like George Papadopoulos get arrested at an airport, thrown in solitary confinement, or Paul Manafort thrown in prison for 7 years for a tax charge, and other people? So people, I think, I believe and I predict there will be accountability, and I think the president is on offense now. I think he's going to march on to an election victory in 2020. And I also think, based on even what Ricky Gervais said at the Golden Globes, was it the Golden Globes where he gave that infamous speech?
Yes.
Where he basically said, guys, you're actors. Some of you don't even have the education of what's that girl, Greta Thunberg?
Right. Right.
And I think it was the most, and he's like, so come up here. You're brilliant actors. This is your profession, but don't make a political speech, which you clearly are not equipped to address, especially when you're given such a massive platform like that.
Yeah.
So I think it really shocked a lot of people that he did come out and say it. It was almost as if Ricky was defending President Trump indirectly by saying that.
I think he's that, and I think Dave Chappelle's another one that's sort of calling out the audience for their excesses.
They're excesses.
Yeah.
And I think when he is reelected, I mean, I live in Hollywood. My wife, she's going to be in some major films this summer, and she'll talk about it another time by herself. We're working on a documentary about our lives, which is funded by Hollywood. And we've been received from an interesting perspective here, almost like we like the spy story. We like you as a couple. We might see a movie in this story eventually. And I worked for Donald Trump. I mean,
Well, you're not seen as a political operative.
That's the
You're
difference.
seen as a professional who was doing his job.
I think that's the difference. But I predict
I think your wife, they're just more suspect of.
and there's an intrigue. There's
it's a good story.
It's a mistake.
They see money too, because it is a good story. You know what I mean?
Something, but also speaking of money, ratings have been horrible. I mean, the Oscars just had their lowest rated. I was at an Oscar viewing party, the Roger Neal viewing party. I was one of probably 150 guests there. So I get invited to these parties with my wife, and there were a lot of rumors there. A lot of people were talking, some of the bigwigs, like, is this good for business to be so anti-Trump? And let's not forget, over 60 million people voted for this guy. Those 60 million people watch TV, they watch movies, they buy movies.
Well,
why do you want to attack the president and hurt your business at the end of the day?
Part of the Trump derangement syndrome is you can't imagine, you can't get past your nose. You can't imagine that people don't agree with you. So their presumption is that those 60 million that voted are now done. They're no longer supporters. I think they really believe that. Then you see, we showed you. Now you like what you got? Now we're done here. And they don't still don't know what's going on in the middle of the country. I'll tell you my next area of focus after homelessness is I heard Wanda Sykes the other day, and she goes, the Russians really were onto something. They got us right where we actually have a problem, which is race. We can't seem to get healed. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the areas where Donald Trump has been off the rail a bit. I don't think he understands how that falls on people.
Remember when I came on your show?
Yeah.
We discussed the wall, and I said on your show that it was more of a racial issue than anything.
Yep.
Because objectively, the wall is a good idea.
Yep.
If you look at it in every facet, it's a good idea.
But when you frame it as a race issue, boom.
But the moment the mainstream media latched onto an older white guy billionaire is trying to keep other people out.
Right. There it is, the narrative.
There's the narrative. Which it should never have become that. So Wanda is still stuck on that, and I think
But I think we have. I don't know if you saw the New York Times magazine this last weekend, but there was an article from an academic in New York, an African American woman who's a historian, and she was making the case for. It was a really beautiful article about the slave trade and the slave sales. What do you call it? The places where these auctions were occurred, and these spots have deep meaning historically and have been sort of marginalized. And I wrote her a letter, and I said I was moved by the article. I'm buying your book immediately.
what was the thesis of the article exactly?
That we need to really. Well, what I took out of it was that we need to come to terms with our history, and
Yes,
that
I agree.
I totally agree with.
Absolutely.
I myself am embarrassed at how little I understood about particularly the Reconstruction era. And when I read the Grant biography, I ran and read Frederick Douglass' biography. And then I started reading more about the whole Reconstruction disaster, and the scales fell from my eyes. And I thought, wow, just one older white dude scales down. How many millions of others?
And we can't
don't.
forget that history is a way to not only understand the present, but to chart the
Yeah,
future.
yeah.
You
And-
need to know
and-
history.
And I am willing to say that it is not even just my white privilege, it's my white supremacy that had me ignoring a period of history that I should have been deeply aware of. And I thank God for Frederick Douglass. And it really, I tell you where the scales just fell from my eyes, is he spoke at the inauguration, what's the word I'm looking for, where they had a famous statue about emancipation, and he got up and he goes, Abraham Lincoln was a white supremacist, and he goes, he's not our, he's not our savior, he's a white supremacist. And I was like, Abraham Lincoln, what? And I read on, I thought, oh my God, I get what he's saying, I get it, and me too. And it just not the problem is the words are wrong. I'm not a skinhead. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
The
of course.
words are not right yet. We
Yeah.
need better words for this. And that's what I want to talk to this woman about. Because I wrote her, I said, we have to find a common history here. We have to heal this. We have to get on this and get everybody on the boat on this one. And she agreed, and I'm going to call her and talk to her. That's a long-term job for me, trying to figure that out.
You brought out some very interesting points. And so I spent 11 nights.
And by the way, I look at it as a physician trying to heal.
Yeah.
That's my posture. I was like, there's a rift, there's an illness, it's amongst us, we got to heal it. But go ahead. You spent a long term.
So no, I spent 11 nights in prison. And in this prison, it's a camp, all right? It was a minimal security camp that was probably cleaner than my university dorm. There was a basketball court and a baseball field, and there were no fences or anything like that.
I'm an expert in prisons. I watch Orange is the New Black.
Exactly. But so when I knew I was going in for 11 nights, I said, I'm going to take a journalistic approach. That was actually my mindset.
Yeah.
I said, I'm in there 11 nights.
Learn something.
I'm going to learn something about what's going on in here, some of the inefficiencies, because obviously I was coming in as a high-profile inmate. So people had questions they wanted to talk to me about. And one thing I did notice, and also Rod Blagojevich, the governor who just had his sentence commuted, he came out and he said exactly what I thought too, and that is that people of color and minorities clearly have the stacks stacked against them. They're disproportionately affected by the legal system in this country. I don't know if it's systemic racism or what it is. I'm not educated enough on the topic to actually use that terminology, but I did realize that some of these people in there were minorities and doing 10 years for having a little coke or weed on them, and their lives completely destroyed.
Well, I'm telling you, this is where I'm very sympathetic to Prop 47 here in this state,
Yes.
which is that criminalizing drug use is a big problem. But we got to do something.
Well,
that's
something, and
not put them in prison. I'm clear on that.
Well, that's something, and this goes into the current administration about racism and how Trump was initially viewed as that by the mainstream media. He has passed criminal reform.
No, I know, but his rhetoric has got to come along.
That's the thing, because he has done far more for the African American community. And
I know he wants to do it, but I would say, dude, read this biography. Read about Frederick Douglass. Read about what happened. I don't think he.
So you think it's optics more than substance? Because clearly, substantively,
but optics right now, no, it's rhetoric and rhetorical. That's what's getting him in trouble with people. He's not rhetorically sensitive to how these things are impacting, and I don't know if he ever can be, because it runs counter to this other thing we were talking about, where he makes everybody crazy. That's part of his instrument. It's part of his. He bludgeons people, and I don't know how you would pull the two together with somebody like him. I don't know, but I sure would. I sure would like to try. I'm gonna talk a little bit to some of the people in there about. I don't know. I've got ill-formed ideas yet, but there's smart people in there, and see if they can help. I know they want to help. That's their deal.
Definitely, that's one thing.
And I see this as a problem.
Absolutely, and I think rhetoric is something you can change.
And by the way, the homeless thing is disproportionately African American male.
Yes,
you want to. I think it's genocide. It's racist. Whatever policies are in place are clearly racist.
Yes,
because that's who's disproportionately out in the street. Give me a break. But there's more. To me, it's about coming to terms with our history. It's something there. Because if we all understood. If we had a deeper understanding and appreciation, I just think just starting there would be a good thing.
We really do need to come to grips with our history.
Yeah, because we need to study the founding principles, and then we need to understand how we got off the rail and how millions of people suffered horribly.
Yes.
Horribly. And we need a language for it too. Like I said, we don't even have the language yet. Do we call it the American Holocaust? What do we call it? I don't know. And to I've got friends like Adam Carolla who go, other countries were responsible, other countries did it. I go, yeah. Doesn't matter. This is our collective history we got to come to terms with.
We do have to come to terms with.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, Dr. Drew.
Yeah.
And obviously I want you to plug whatever projects you're working on and whatever is coming out next for you. What's coming out next for you? What's happening?
Still doing Teen Mom and all that stuff, drdrew.com.
How's Janelle doing, by the way? Because I actually am. I don't want to say. I don't know if the word guilty is right, but I used to watch.
Teen Mom
guy? maybe like 7 years ago. I don't know if Janelle and those girls are still in it, but and then she was kicked out, and she had the boyfriend. And what happened with her? Are they still on the show? What's happening with
Janelle's on the show, and so I don't have a lot of direct contact with her anymore. But I believe she's getting a divorce from David.
Oh,
that's
wow.
the last I heard. But she was doubling down on her family and her husband, and I don't think it really worked out for her. But I've known these girls for over 10 years, and I have a deep affection for all of them.
Yeah.
And concern about them. Even Farrah. Even Farrah, as miserable as she made me sometimes, I always had an affection for her. I told her that. I told her I would miss her when she left the program. And if either of them come back, I will not be unhappy because we'll get to reconnect and see what's going on with them. But yeah, you have any other Teen Mom questions? Do you have other ones you want to know about?
Have you talked to Artie Lang at all?
I have not, but it's funny you would say that. I talked to Jackie the Joke Man last night. See, I do streaming shows on a regular basis at drdrew.com. And I talked to him on a streaming show last night, and it made me want to call Artie. So I will call Artie.
Yeah.
I hear he's doing very well right now.
Is he doing well? Last time I thought he almost died.
He had real trouble.
Yeah.
But I think he's on the other side right now.
He's on the other side.
He's got a tough illness, and I'm just glad he's with us and well right now.
And I saw Ben Affleck, too. He just came out with an interesting story in the New York Times with alcoholism that resulted in him getting out of the Batman role. So these are really chronic diseases, and people need your help. So
they are bad, man. You if you're not an addict or alcoholic, you cannot understand how tough it is for them and how the tricks the brain plays on them and what they have to do to stick with it. It's a chronic challenge.
You had a show dealing with addictions and celebrities.
Yeah, Celebrity Rehab.
Celebrity Rehab. Are you still? Is that coming again, or are you?
People keep talking about it, but I don't know. I mean, people think about it, talk about it, but not yet.
I think that'd be a great way to actually address a lot of people's chronic issues that they.
Well, there's a lot of stuff we could get into on the mental health front,
Yeah.
and the way addictions are treated is kind of different now. There's sort of different models and different ways that we could get into. Still a dangerous and deadly disease, though. And this is the part that people don't get. They're like, oh, people are dying. It's like, yeah, if we did a show called Cancer House, would you be surprised if people died? Well, addiction has a worse prognosis than most cancers. It just is. And I think people are finally coming to terms to that with opiates. Pretty much all the people that died from a celebrity rehab died of opiate addiction. The majority of it at the hands of my peers, which is I could do another hour on that.
Wow.
The overprescribing of opiates. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So drdrew.com, everything is there. A lot of podcasting, a lot of digital stuff. And I have a movie, I think it's called A Time to Kill. Man, so they want me to promote that.
Please do. You promote everything.
It was a lot of fun. I just played myself.
You play A Time to Kill. What's that about?
It's about a guy that kills people. but he
in due time.
He comes to me because he's Final Kill.
Final Kill.
He he was anxious, and I kept asking him why, and he wouldn't tell me. And because he was murdering people, and he had trouble telling me about that. So it's kind of fun. So
When's it coming out?
I think a couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for it. Okay.
We will. Absolutely. Can't wait to see it. And I want to
thanks.
see your acting skills. Is this your first movie? I know you've been in The Simpsons
No,
and,
I will
and
occasionally-
Family Guy.
I will do stuff just for fun. It has no real. Somebody just asked me to do it. I go, okay. I played the Olsen twins' father in the New York Minute,
Oh, did you?
their only full-length feature, and that was. It's fun to work with people in that context. And you know what am I doing there? Just having a good time.
Well, we'll check it out. And I hope everybody and all our viewers check it out. Check out Dr. Drew's podcast. Simone and I were on it. It's incredible. He's a great friend, genius, and I'm really proud to have you as our first in-person
Pleasure to be
live
here.
interview.
Happy anniversary.
Thanks so much from both Simone and I, and thank you, and looking forward to seeing what you have coming up next.
Thank you so much.
That was an incredible interview with Dr. Drew. For more exclusive content, make sure you do subscribe on the Himalaya app to Punching Back with George Papadopoulos or anywhere you listen or watch your podcast. We have a lot more coming out. Stay tuned, and thanks so much for your support.